Welcome, and thank you for clicking on this video. In this one, we're going to be comparing my Hofner Contemporary Series Club Bass with the more affordable Epiphone Rumblekat. Can the Epiphone be a more affordable alternative to a Contemporary Series Club Bass? Will it sound better? Will it sound different? Let's find out. So the genesis of this video idea came from me wanting a more affordable version of the club bass that I could take out to gigs. Now, I have been gigging my club bass and I love it, but there have been a few issues in the fragility side of things that make me want a more affordable version I can just take around town. Enter the Epiphone Rumblekat. Now, if you haven't seen the previous videos I've done on this Epiphone, please check those out, and I will leave some links in the description box below. But the question today is, can the Epiphone sound like the club bass? So let's find out. So for today, we're going to have the identical settings, and I'm just going to plug them both in, and let's hear the sounds. Now, the Hofner Club Bass control layout is very confusing. So if you are interested in more explanations and details about how these very unintuitive controls work, then please click on some of the links in the description box below. Now, for a club bass, I typically only use the neck pickup. I find the bridge pickup is so close to the bridge that there's very little string orbit back there, and I just don't like how it sounds. So for me and how I use this club bass, I almost always just use the neck pickup. And there are typically only two sounds I can really get out of this club bass, practically speaking. And that's with the volume all the way up. I have the switch between rhythm and solo on rhythm. So there's a little bit of a volume pad on that. Solo is just louder, unattenuated all the way up. I tend to leave it on rhythm, and then the two sounds are either bass off or bass on. So let's first hear it finger style, volume all the way up, rhythm, and bass off. So it has a pretty nice, characteristic, woody Hofner type sound. I should mention, for today's video, I have strung both of these basses up with GHS flatwound, precision flatwound strings, gauges 45 to 95. These are my second favorite flatwounds, second only to the Tomastic Infels. And I'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But now let's hear the Rumblekat with a similar setting. So because the pickup placement is in a different spot, to keep things fair, we're just using neck pickup today, but it is a little further away from the bridge. This is volume tone, so it's clearly quite different than the Hofner. But for this demonstration, I'm gonna have the tone all the way up with just the neck pickup. And I think that's probably the closest that you're gonna get between these two different control layouts. So here we go, finger style. All right. So right away, I think you can tell they sound different. Now another sound I use on the Hofner is with the bass on, which does engage a different capacitor and rolls off a little more highs. And this way you can't use a bridge pickup at all. Here we go. Let's switch back to the Epiphone. So it's not quite the same, but for this one, we're still using neck pickup, but let's roll the tone knob down to about 50%. Now, only if the song calls for it, which for me is only about 10-15% of the time, I will play with a pick and palm mute. It's arguably a cool sound on this Hofner. I'm not a very good pick player, but every now and again the song calls for a pick. So Hofner, this is now volume all the way up, rhythm, bass off. Now let's hear the Epiphone. We'll roll the tone all the way back up to 100 again, just the neck pickup. And these are pretty run-of-the-mill Tortex 0.73 yellow picks, so same pick on both basses. I forgot to mention, on the Epiphone, I have upgraded the bridge to a Babicz made for Epiphone bridge. And you can check out that video or leave a link below as well. I think sonically and setup and intonation wise, it is a considerable step up from the Epiphone 3-point bridge, but it does alter the tone. So check out that video if you haven't already. All right, well, let's put both of these basses in a musical context up to a drum track. So this way we can hear how the different sounds interact with other instruments around it. So for this comparison, we're just going to use a neck pickup in both basses. In the first pass, we'll have the Hofner with the bass switch off, and on the Epi, we'll have the tone knob all the way up. And in the second pass, we'll have the bass switch on for the Hofner, and then we'll roll this tone knob back to 50% on the Epi. And for the third pass, tone knob all the way up on the Epi, bass switch off, we'll play with the pick. All right, here we go. Well, I hope you enjoyed that playing example. Please let me know what you thought of the tones by leaving a comment below. Now, comparing electronics, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the Hofner controls are very not intuitive. Once you get used to it and you know what they do, you kind of go, okay, I kind of get why you did that. But it's very much a historical thing. And I find I could really only get two different sounds out of the Hofner control plate. On the other hand, volume, volume, tone, with a full sweep of the tone knob, you can get lots of different sounds in between if that is what you desire. So more tonal options on the Epiphone. In terms of pickup placement, I wish that my club bass had more of a kind of a cavern pickup placement style. So the cavern, for those who don't know, has a neck pickup and a middle pickup right there, instead of the bridge pickup. As I mentioned earlier, there's so little string orbit and vibration back here that this bridge pickup is essentially sonically useless to me. And it just has too much of a twangy mid-range sound that I never use it. In contrast, the middle pickup on the Rumblekat is where I think this bass shines. This pickup placement is awesome, and especially with round wounds, that's the secret sauce of this bass right here. But if you're after that kind of traditional Hofner tone, then it's neck pickup. The placement is slightly different. But, and here let's talk about the sound. So sonically, the Epiphone sounds much larger. And if you analyze the frequency range, there are deeper lows and higher highs. So it's a broader frequency spectrum available on the Epiphone Rumblekat, even with the same flatwounds. In contrast, the Hofner is much more narrow, much more focused. There are lows, but it doesn't extend down into the lower frequency range nearly as much as the Epiphone. So in a mix, it's much more focused and much more narrow, which may or may not be a good thing. I think it makes the Hofner less versatile because it sounds like a Hofner. In contrast, I think the Epiphone is more sonically versatile, especially with that middle pickup. Now, in terms of mid-range complexity, and this is where I think these two basses, depending on what you're after, really separate themselves. The Hofner is much more complex in that mid-range. You can hear a more broad overtone spectrum to my ear. And more importantly, I think the descriptor I can best use for the Hofner is it has a more woodier, more kind of papery attack, in contrast to the Epi, where the mid-range just sounds like it has less going on. I think this Rumblekat sounds less woody and less papery in comparison to the Hofner. So if you're after that type of sound, then I think you can't quite get there with the Epi, but the Hofner has it in spades. All right. Now let's talk about one of my biggest gripes with the Hofner Club Bass, which is one of the main reasons why I was looking for an alternative. And that's the tuners. I really, really do not like these Hofner tuners for a number of reasons. The keys feel flimsy, and I'm always afraid that if I knock it the wrong way, I'm gonna crack one of these kind of almost cheap feeling plastic tuning pegs off. And as you can see in the shot, the posts are so small. The whole kit just looks and feels very fragile. Now, more practically speaking, the hole through which you put the silk end of the string is so small that you were very, very limited to the type of strings you can put on. And I've done a few videos on this type of finding strings for your Beatle bass in the past, so you can check those out if you want. Now, I originally had Tomastic flats on this, and they barely fit, and I was always afraid that the low E string would come flying off. So then, for the past year or so, I had the specific for Beetle bass labella deep talk and flatwounds. Those were engineered specifically with a super small gauge string thread that you could put through the hole. Labella makes great strings. I have nothing against the company, but for me, I never really got used to how they felt. They felt a little too cable-y for me, a little too stiff, if you will, but that's very much a personal, subjective thing. I've only recently, when I was prepping for this video, discovered that GHS flatwounds, so the purple pack, gauges 45 to 95, are the low E string was skinny enough to barely fit through the hole. So I was able to squeeze it in, and I was able to string this up with GHS flats, which is my preference in terms of feel and sonically as well. But here's the other unintuitive thing with these Hofners. The traditional teaching is because there's a tailpiece and there's extra length back here, what you actually need are medium scale strings to fit your Hofner, which is what I tried. But what ended up happening is the flatwounds on these GHS, which are 35.5 inches string wound length, so that's ball to silk, was too long. And I ended up having exposed flatwounds running around this super tiny diameter tuner, so it couldn't fit, and I didn't even put tension on it because I was gonna likely break the string. So instead, I had a set of short scale GHS flats that I took off another bass, and those fit. Now those have a 32.75 inch wind, so that's ball to silk, and as you can see here, it fully clears the 0 fret, fully clears the nut, and the silk starts well past the nut, which is really all you need to do. You don't want any silk on top of the nut or the 0 fret. So believe it or not, these are short scale GHS flats on my Hofner. And I think I think they feel better than the labellas for what I like to feel under my fingers. I also like the way they sound better as well. All right, let's talk about other physicalities on the instrument. In terms of string spacing, the string spacing on the Hofner is considerably tighter and more narrow than the Epiphone. These are measuring about 14 millimeters, the way I have this bass set up. You are able to widen the string spacing down here at the saddle, but then your strings won't be perfectly centered over the pull pieces, where I do on this bass, and that's measuring 14 millimeters. In contrast, the Epiphone with both the stock bridge and the Babicz is running 17.5 millimeter string spacing. So if you're switching back and forth between, say, a Fender and a semi-hollow, then going from 19 to 14 is a bit of a jump. Going from 19 to 17.5, from a muscle memory point of view, is an easier jump to make. So, the answer to the question, can the Rumblekat be a more affordable alternative to the club bass? And the answer is, I think so, depending on what you want your club bass to do. So, I do think they sound different. I think the Rumblekat doesn't quite sound like a Hofner, but in a live setting, you could probably get away with it. What I will say, though, is the Hofner's appearance and look is iconic, and it's kind of like nothing else comes close to that. The other thing I'll say is, well, for the last two songs I produced and played on, where people have paid me to do such things, I did on the Hofner. And I had done a few different bass tracks with different instruments for them to listen to. And both times, different artists, they both gravitated towards the Hofner. Because it has a thing. And it does its thing really well. It doesn't do much else, but it does that Hofner thing. So if you're playing a lot of sessions, and those sessions call for that kind of Hofner style semi-hollow sound, then in that setting, I would say get the Hofner. Because every time I open the case with the Hofner, everyone goes, ooh, that's cool. In contrast, you open the case of the Epiphone, and I don't think the non-bass player reaction is quite as immediate as it is with the Hofner. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think the Epiphone Rumblekat is a super cool bass. What I would say, though, in my experience, having owned this bass for a little bit now, I think the Rumblekat shines more with round wounds. I think sonically is more versatile, and I think it sounds better with rounds. But that's just for me and what I do with a bass. But please let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you next time. Peace.